there is a Lego machine supposedly out there that waters the plants and plants the plants, not in that order, plants the plants and waters the plants. It digs the trenches. It said it's got 12 motors and it's a 4-wheel drive. So that was kind of interesting. Also looked at growing plants inside your house. For those of you who live in an urban environment or live in an environment that has a lot of 5G and maybe 6 coming up, there's it's, what is it called? A Vax thing, something, I can't remember exactly. But anyway, it looks like a big aquarium, a long, big aquarium. It has its own watering system. It doesn't utilize the hydroponics, but it utilizes earth. And you can plant lettuce and herbs and smaller plants. I don't think the soil's deep enough for you to grow sweet potatoes or anything. But the plants looked very healthy. They did a time-lapse photography of the lettuce growing. And I thought it was a neat idea so that you could get away from some of the environmental pollutions, not only that, but the chemicals that are put on your food. This way you have control of it, because what they're doing out there to our environment is horrific, with all the poisons and the chemtrails and nanobots and whatever else they're putting out there is not good for our consumption. So I thought that's a neat thing, and I'm going to look into maybe even getting one. We have some land out there behind, but with all the chemtrails that we get here, I don't think I would want to plant one out there. One of the interesting things, I caught 2 commercials, and what made me listen to them was, there's a Tim Gunn, and he was in America's Next Top Model. He was in the Project Runway with Heidi Klum. He's a designer. Anyway, he's doing this commercial with command strips. And what caught my ear was he kept saying, "Do no harm, do no harm." And of course, with the command strips, you put it on your wall and you can, take the command strip down and nothing is ruined. But I like the phrase "do no harm," because that is demonstrating do no harm. And I also saw a commercial that was horrific. It was a commercial for Excedrin for migraines. And what happens during this commercial is the top half of the head explodes into this dust. And I thought, well, they're telling us what they're doing. So that was the couple of commercials that I happened to catch. And what did you want to go into dreams next, or what did you want to go into?
No, keep going.
No, I was going to, before your dreams, I was going to read, I came across this Pythagorean, or not Pythagorean, but Pythagoras, the Dream of Pythagoras is what it was called. And he, of course, was born about 560 BC, so this is quite old. And we're also under whoever translated this, because there's an old word here now, soul. But I thought it was interesting. It says, the soul was not then imprisoned in a gross mortal body as it is now. It was united to a luminous, heavenly, ethereal body, which served it as a vehicle to fly through the air, rise to the stars, and wander over all the regions of immensity. And that came from Pythagoras in Travels of Cyrus. But I thought, oh, how apropos, and they were getting this, how many years ago? But anyway, you're on. He's just sitting here. I had an experience with a plant when I was in Florida, And I had lived in a condo on the second floor. Well, actually, it was a first and second because it was like a townhouse. But I had bought some nicely one big cherry tomato plant, and it was had already bloomed. It had cherry tomatoes on it, and I didn't have it that long. And so I myself went down to sun myself at the pool and take a swim. And I'm laying, after I come out of the water, sopping wet, I'm laying on the chair trying to dry off. And all of a sudden, I get this impression from my tomato plant. And I mean, it was strong. And I thought, what the heck? So I quickly dried the rest of me off, and I ran into the condo and walked out to the deck, and the plant had died. And I think it was communicating to me, hey, this is hot, and I'm not withstanding it, and I'm dying. And I guess I'll never forget it because it was so strong, and it was
sad too.
Yeah, kind of sad. There went my tomato plant. Bob likes tomatoes. I felt bad that I didn't. Well, I had watered it that morning, but this was like late afternoon. So in the meantime, the sun gets pretty strong. It was during the summer, and the plant itself just didn't survive. So I saw something the other day. I like to watch the Iron Chef from Japan because I like what they do with the food, but the battle was for bamboo shoots. And now bamboo shoots can get very big. They're bigger than, well, they're as big as a man's hand, actually, some of them. And I grew up seeing bamboo shoots in a small tin that my grandmother used that were flat and skinny and little. But if you buy bamboo shoots in a can in a Chinese grocery store, wherever you're going, they're big. They're big hunks. And that was surprising to me. But what was more surprising is to the size that they were doing for the battle bamboo, they call it. And as one of the dishes was a big half of a bamboo, one of the big ones that was scooped out, and it had another filling. And as they're eating this, 4 judges are eating this, one of the gals, her name was Mia, she says, "What is that?" And the man, the chef, had put tiny microphones hidden in each half of a bamboo. And what you heard was them scooping out into the plant. I mean, the microphone was that small. I was like, whoa.
And she ate it?
No, they didn't eat the bamboo. I mean, the microphone, thank goodness, yeah. Because as you got down to the leaf part, you're not going to eat that anyway. But
that's what I'm saying.
Can you imagine how tiny? Yeah, that was. Anyway, it was kind of an interesting program there. So, you?
On the topic of animals and talking to you, I'll tell a little story about the cat and the rat.
Okay.
We've got these little critters that just love to come here because they find they get the best of the water, the best food, and so naturally they're going to be attracted to those things they don't have to go forage for. Well, we got these 2 little cats. One of them isn't little; he's a big boy. He's our Lion King, actually, and he's been around here for quite a while. Yeah, and he's the most docile thing you can imagine. He loves to get in her car at night when she comes home and sit there and purrs. He loves cars. He'd go for a ride anywhere. Well, this guy, he's a stealth bomber, and when it comes to the rat kingdom, they don't have a chance. And he'll lay in a place totally motionless. It doesn't look like he's doing anything. Maybe he's just dreaming or something. And all of a sudden, it's like this flash of black and white streak and then he's got a rat in his mouth. Well, for a while, I hadn't seen any activity with this guy. And I'm seeing all these rats, and they're all running around having a good time at night, eating the chicken food and, you know, drinking the water and everything. I'm like, hey, man, what's the deal? You know, you've got this runaway herd of rats over here, and you're not even giving the incentive to go look somewhere else. Well, that went on for a few days, and all of a sudden, a couple of nights ago, I'm in one of the tack rooms, and here he comes, and I hear this. He's got a certain sound about him when he's got something. And it's just like this, mew, 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 you know, and it's like, and I look down, and he's got the biggest rat I've seen around here in his mouth. And of course, he's already killed it. And here he is standing there at my feet looking at me. Mew, mew, mew. You know, oh boy, okay. So, so I had to pet him and say, good boy, and, you know, and all that. Put a little commotion going on. And so that whole thing was about, he had to come, and he just goes to Janine. He won't come to me about that, but he came to me specifically to show me that he was on the job.
I think that's great. We do communicate with our animals, and even the wild ones we can communicate with.
Right.
And it's I know every chance I get, I sing "New You" to all the critters that come traipsing into the yard. Haven't had too many during the winter here, but during the summer we have quite a few.
Especially the ones you think might do some kind of damage to your other kids or so on, and that becomes a very emotional event. Sometimes it's hard to recognize that if you're kind to the other animal, even though you're not doing anything to them, you're just not doing something against them. Makes a big difference. And the New You is very important.
Right, we do no harm.
Yes, exactly. That's the phrase, do no harm.
Do no harm. And they pick that up immediately. They know. They know you're not going to hurt them, and they know you're going to give them space out in the wild or wherever they are. And
it's like the hunter. It's like the hunter that kills animals just for the we'll say the aggrandizement of stuffing them and hanging them on their wall. You know.
Oh,
and
yes.
And then the day comes, they find themselves in a situation where one of those animals is eating them.
Yeah.
And it happens. You hear stories about that all, especially in our northern states, you know, where the grizzlies still live in some places.
And your cougars.
Especially India.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the tigers.
One of those, yeah. One of the pictures with Rabazar, which I thought was probably one of the greatest pictures I've seen with him, was when he was standing up hugging the tiger.
With a white tiger.
Yeah, one of the most ferocious animals on the planet.
Yeah, it's beautiful. That's one of my favorites too. I also like him on the white horse.
Yeah.
Yeah, that beautiful artwork that Ava does. Actually, you can purchase some of this from her if you go on Facebook.
Oh, okay. That's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we got some real friendly chickens, like you guys been talking about. He had a couple. One of them was one of those little Polish guys, and his name was Jack. And then you come in the yard, and he immediately come over and jump up on your foot. You want to ride? I don't care who you were. He was just right there. It's like, here I am, take me for a ride, you know. And he'd get up on your shoulder, and he'd stay with you until you decided to put him down.
That's fun. That's fun. I had a cockatiel who loved to ride on the vacuum when I vacuumed. I have a lot of stories about him, but that's another time. You know, they're fun. The animals are really fun. When I first got a cockatiel, I was living in Hawaii at the time, and I'd gone around the other side of the island to a pet store, and I saw this pearl cockatiel, and I thought, oh, how beautiful. And so I thought about it overnight whether or not I'd purchase it. Well, I get in the car the next day. It's a weekend, and off I go to purchase this bird. Well, she had a little trouble getting him out of the cage. She said he hasn't been hand tamed. And I thought, well, that's okay, right? Oh, well. Brought him home, purchased him, brought him home, and I had a cage for him and everything set up, and the food and the water and all that good stuff. So I tried to have him out of the cage and get some exercise and whatnot, and he was nutty. He bit, he did this, he did that. I mean, he was just a holy terror. And I took him and put him in a carrier. I got in the car and I said, if you don't shape up right now, you're going back to the pet store. That's it. And I started driving. And all of a sudden, I noticed his demeanor changed. And I thought, what's going on here? So I turned the car around because I really had a love for this bird. And I went home and I put him back in the cage, but I left the door open. And he walks out of the cage like a parrot, and he crawls up my leg and he sits on my knee. Now, this is not a hand-tamed cockatiel. This is one that's just raised with the parents. So from then on, he was one of the best birds and the funniest birds that I've ever seen. If you were sitting on the couch and you were eating, let's say, an ice cream bar, okay, what he would do is crawl up the back of the couch, crawl down onto the arm, grab a bite full of the ice cream bar, and quick scurry behind the couch. It's like, we're supposed to know he doesn't do this. He was quite a character. But he became one of the best birds I ever had. So it's amazing, the turnaround.
That's for sure. Yeah, I got some of those courage stories, but for another time. I wanted to bring one little point before I, get off of this thing. For those that haven't been following the California wildfires, there's been some very interesting developments as far as the discovery of the reasons for them. I don't know if we talked about this one of the previous ones or not, but they're actually intentionally set. And there's one particular video on YouTube that shows the trail, a line of these fires going through all these different housing communities. And there was an issue here back a while with Brown and the high-speed rail system that they were going to try and shove through. Well, if you follow this one line of fires, and it has nothing to do with the forest, by the way, because all these fires were directly pointed at the homes and the cars. And that's why there's 1,000 people missing. They don't know where they are because they were disintegrated inside these structure fires and literally disintegrated. There's a trail, a track, a line that follows the high-speed rail layout where these fires have been set and are being set. So people think that all this stuff going on is just some kind of a freak accident, and there's nothing freak about it, and there's no accident about it.
Yes.
How do you find that, Mike? I tried to show it to my boss, and I
planned.
couldn't find it.
I don't know if they pulled that video or not, because there's a couple of videos that I've seen that once I saw them, I went back to find them again, and they weren't there. One of them was about an actual military incursion going on down in Mexico. The guy that was videoing it was on site in the incursion. All these people were shooting at each other, military against the ISIS people. And they identified him in the video, and it was on for like half an hour, and then all of a sudden it was gone, and it didn't come back on again. So I don't know what happened to that. But if you go on and look up truth behind California wildfires, you might find one of them. And the thing that probably annoyed me more than anything was watching Trump stand there with Brown in that one video where they were talking about how terrible it is and how we're going to take care of this and that, and it's like, when somebody shoot that sucker, it's amazing. This guy's a mass murderer, and all these people can't see the forest for the trees, and that's a literal.
Yeah, that's what that commercial I was telling you about Excedrin for migraines. When the back half of the head and the part of the front explodes into these particles, just dust, and I thought they're advertising what they're doing. Yep,
they do, and they
is.
Yeah, they do it up front beforehand. But most people are so brain dead they can't pick it up. They have no concept about what's really going on behind it all.
Right. They won't see that. They'll just pick up the Excedrin for the migraines,
Yeah, exactly.
You want to know something interesting? Back in the early 90s, I had a friend that had a lot of connections with all this classified stuff, and he made an interesting observation to me. He says, you know, there's a communication between all the people that are in these secret organizations. And he told me, he said, whenever, you know, you watch a news program and it's a bunch of, you know, nonsense, you know, they're just lying to the public. He says, you watch it and listen to it. But every once in a while, they have a news item that they want to spread to all their secret members. And he said, whenever they want to spread something that's really true, that they're trying to communicate to all their friends, they show a picture of the Washington Monument in the background of the news story, and then whenever you see that, then you know what they're saying is true. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, why don't you tell about your boss the other day?
Yeah, so I was. All right. Well, thank you, Mike.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Well, I was going to change gears here, and when I was at work yesterday, my boss came in and I you know, I was telling them on Friday morning that when I went to work, the chemtrails were just absolutely ungodly. They had we were down to a half-mile visibility and a 300-foot ceiling because of all the chemtrails that they had sprayed. I mean, and it was like these chem pilots were trying to unload all their chemicals. So it seemed to me that, I mean, the sky was just literally overcast. Once the sun came up and I could see the skies. The skies, you know, normally you see the zigzag, the checker patterns. I mean, the sky was just completely covered with chemtrails when on Friday morning, and it was just almost ungodly. And I was thinking to myself, well, maybe these chemtrail pilots that were told they had until noon on Friday to stop doing that. It was almost like they were getting rid of all their chemicals on Friday morning so they could comply with that request. And so anyway, on Saturday, my boss was off on Friday, but he came in on Saturday. And I was talking to him about the chemtrails, and I said, well, he says, well, you know, I still don't believe in chemtrails. And I said, well, just was that on Thursday or Friday? We were talking about that on the blog show, where somebody mentioned that some people in Washington went public with it, and they actually admitted that they were doing chemtrails. And
do you know who told them to stop?
Huh?
Do you know who told them to stop?
Yeah.
Revizar.
Yeah, Revizar did.
In that, did you see the Galactic Choices Part 3?
Did you see Part 3 of the Choices program?
On Monday?
Where Claudia talked about what was going on, the update?
No, I don't believe I did.
Yeah, that can be found. Kelsey?
Yeah,
to get to that, how do you get to that?
Well, I'm going to cover that here.
Okay.
I want to bring that up, but when I'm ready, I'll bring it up. I'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes here, Mike. But anyway, okay. So I told I was telling my boss about, you know, that thing where that in Washington, I don't remember who it was, somebody in our group said that they went public, you know, and they weren't hiding the fact that chemtrails were taking place anymore. And I told my boss about that. And so he goes over to the computer and brings up the internet and does a Google search, and we can't find it anywhere. There's no mention on the internet about that taking place. But he did find something very interesting. And what it was, there's a group called the Geoengineering Watch Group, and they did an interview with a retired general, an Air Force general. Anyway, so this guy from this group interviewed this general, and the guy was asking this general, and it turns out this general was in the Air Force for 34 years. And he was a 2-star general, and they interviewed him, and they were talking about the chemtrails and the different things that our government and government contractors might be doing to our atmosphere, having to do with climate control, that sort of thing. And he brought up a bunch of really interesting points that I had never heard before. And he was asking the general, he says, well, you know, you've seen these things in the sky? And he says, yeah. He says, down in Arizona where he lives, he says that these trails are just all over the place, crisscrossing the skies, and we want to find out about it. We have a group of concerned citizens, mostly ex-military, that want to look into it and find out what's going on. And he says there's no doubt in my mind. He says that there's something going on. And during the interview, the interviewer asked him, well, what, you know, why isn't this information coming out? And he says, well, the people that are working on these projects, you know, are under orders to not disclose any kind of activities that they're doing, and they could do jail time, or they could be assassinated or whatever if they come clean. And so there's a big fear among the contractors to not reveal that stuff, and plus it's all compartmentalized. And he says, well, you see the stuff that's going on, don't you? And he says, yeah. And he says, well, the interviewer asked the general, what do we need? You know, I mean, isn't there a point where somebody should say something? I mean, and he says, yeah. He says, well, we need to get the people in charge, like the politicians and these people, you know, to start discussing things in public, and giving the American people a chance to find out what's really going on. And he says, well, a lot of these projects are very highly classified. And then the interviewer said, well, as an example, he says, well, you think, Mike, your chickens are making noise in the background?
Yeah, that's my chicken. Sorry.
Yeah. So anyway, the general is saying this is all classified and people aren't going to come forward. And he says, well, the interviewer says, well, what happens if things, you know, start harming the American public? And he says, as an example, he says, remember back in World War II, he says they had what was called the Manhattan Project, where they did all this nuclear testing. And he said that during all those atomic bomb tests, it has now been proven, people have done studies, research studies, and they have found that 450,000 Americans died as a direct result of the radiation poisoning from those atomic tests. And I never heard that before. But he says it conclusively proves that 450,000 Americans died just because of the military and government doing these experiments. And this interviewer says, well, you know, how do we know that these chemtrails and all this spraying that's going on isn't harming the American people? You know, I mean, if, you know, don't you think that maybe somebody ought to, if it's really harming the people, you know, they should come clean, you know, they look at a lot of this chemical spraying, they call it geoengineering for climate control, to protect the climate and protect the people from the outrageous weather that's going on around the world. So they do the geoengineering to stop the dangers of the bad weather. But somebody in there forgot to mention that all this nasty weather that's happening around the world is being done by HAARP, and all the governments are doing the bad weather and then using geoengineering as a way of preventing the damage from the harm that they're doing on the other side. You know, it's like, you know, we're going to build a fire, but we're creating all the fires, but we're putting them out with our other technologies, and look how wonderful we are because we're putting out the fires. But they don't mention they're the one that started the fires in the first place. Well, anyway, it went round and round, and it was very interesting. Then he brought up another point that I never heard. You know how they can, you know, you guys live in California. You know how it never rains in California? Well,
Yeah,
that's because they use HARP to get all the moisture out of the atmosphere off the coast of California, so it rains out over the ocean, and by the time the air hits California, it's dry and it's not humid enough to rain anymore. Well, this interviewer pointed out that over in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, and he said every country that was named as a culprit after the 9/11 bombings, every country in the Middle East that was named, like Saudi Arabia and Iran, all these other countries, every country that got named as being a culprit in the 9/11, you know, falsely accused, of course, their countries, the governments went in and they used the same technology they use in California, and they created a drought. They call it the 1,000-year drought. They stopped all the rain from raining on those countries. So it's drier now than it has been in over 1,000 years. And of course, when you get so little rain, it just makes all these people very desperate to move out and do other things. And that could be one of the reasons why we have a lot of this terrorist activity against the American people, because even though the Americans don't know we're doing this, the Arabs do know that we're doing it. You know, the Arabs know that they didn't do 9/11. The American people don't know that. The American people think the Arabs did it, and the Arabs know they didn't do it. So, you know, it's one of those vicious circles where, you know, the Arabs are kind of justified for what they're doing, you know, terrorizing and bombing, you know, the innocent Americans. Well, Americans aren't really that innocent, considering we are the ones that shot ourselves in the foot by doing the demolition of the World Trade Center. So, and it was just touching the surface. So I thought that was and
the Obama plants are doing their best to keep the scenario going so that nobody really knows what's happening on the inside. This is one of the reasons Trump has jumped all over Arabia yet. He won't, but it's one of those reasons. And by the way, you know, there's been a lot of confrontation between Trump and one of the U.S. Supreme Court justices, Roberts, the guy that's at the head of the poll. And he's going to fall soon, as well as Ginsburg, of course. But there's a lot of stuff that's in the process of taking place there as well. So there's going to be a lot of things changing judicially, which has really been that's been the big holdout. You know, the 35 years that I've been involved in the court system, I've watched this whole thing deteriorate, and it went from bad to worse. And now we're at a point where, like, okay, some people are starting to realize just how worse it's gotten. And that's what Trump's up to. He's changing that part of the system. For those of us who have been engaged, now we can engage fully. And you're going to start seeing some of the results as a part of all that.
Well, anyway, you know, my boss doesn't really, he's, you know, when I told him what I told him, and then he listened to that interview with the general, and, you know, it's just like he's getting his first look at the possibility that chemtrails might possibly be real. And I told my boss, I said, I mean, my gut feeling is, if this isn't stopped right now, I told my boss, in about 20 years, this planet won't be livable. And I says, it doesn't affect me. I'm a lot older than you are, but in 20 years, you and your family is going to be out there trying to survive, and you're not going to have any food to eat because they're killing off you know, a lot of people don't realize that all this chemtrails is killing off the infrastructure for the food chain. You know, most people look, they drive down the interstate highway and look off and they see these big corn fields and wheat fields and bean fields and say, oh man, there's lots of food out there. But the fact is they don't realize that the food chain is just about dead right now. And all those crops out there have absolutely no nutritional value whatsoever.
That's why the water process that the Davinia and the John Ellis, these systems are going to have to take a much bigger step in the process of cleaning all this up, because it's it's a foundation again, water, like air. And if you can't get it,
that's a very big part of it is the water, but the other part is there's the soil is so destroyed that there's no humus left in the soil. There's no night crawlers. When I was a kid, and we used to, back in the late 50s, early 60s, I'd go to my neighbor's farm, and they'd be out there with a 2-bottom plow plowing their fields, and you'd go behind the plow, and you'd see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these big fat night crawlers that were laying on top of the plowed furrows. And you go out in the same field today, you could search acres and acres and acres of farmland, and you wouldn't see one nightcrawler anywhere because the soil is dead.
Monsanto.
Monsanto.
Well, of course, it's Monsanto is a major player in that, absolutely. And so not only is it the fertilizers, it's the pesticides and everything else they put on these crops. And
but the farmers need to change their attitudes about what's going on. And I know some very good farmers who have quit farming because of the mandate that's been put on them. But they don't realize their habits and how they treat the soil and the plants and how they do their growing and their harvesting is totally contrary to the common sense rule, let alone the common law side. And that's part of the problem we have.
Well, you're making my point. That's my point. And I'm not going into detail like you are, but the point is the average American that says, oh, we're in wonderful condition. We have lots of crops out there. And yeah, we have lots of crops, but you might just well be.
I got to tell everybody one thing. This is really interesting. How many people know about Petco? Have ever heard of it?
Petco?
You guys have Petco where you are?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, we have one in Wausau.
Okay, well, this is a very interesting point, because we've been, Janine buys her cat food and a lot of stuff from Petco because there's nobody else around here. So about a month ago when we were in there talking, one of the ladies, she was just a sales rep, I made some comment about it. I said, well, how you guys doing with your poison list? And she looked at me kind of funny and she said, yeah, she says, if I was in charge of this, it definitely wouldn't be this way. So we didn't talk anymore about it. And so all of a sudden, I guess it was about a week ago, Janine was in the store, and all of a sudden they're talking about, yeah, we're getting rid of all the chemical crap in all of the food products that we've been buying. We're going 100% organic.
Wow.
This is Petco. This is a major food chain for animals.
Absolutely.
So somebody told somebody, just like Rabazar told somebody, hey, you got to get off your butt here because the consequences are dire. And if you don't know what that means, you're going to find out. You're not going to like it. So little by little, there's going to be the intervention of people who are being given the opportunity to do, not necessarily do the right thing, but to stop doing the wrong thing. If they'll stop that, that's the do no harm part. Doesn't mean you got to go out and force somebody to drink water. That's not the point. The point is you got to give them the choice to decide which one they want. And if you're not giving them a choice, then you're on the wrong side, the bad side. The here you come again side, and guess what? You get to get poisoned for a few hundred lifetimes or whatever. So, yeah, good stuff.